It
We'll all
should.
find we'll all find out together. Like, okay, it
Yes.
says being left. Okay, and this will pop up here at some point.
Yeah.
Thank God you do the technologies. You'd be amazing how pathetic I am. You know.
Oh, I'm terrible. I'm not that great with it.
No, and the one thing you got to do is there we go, is deal with that thermostat for that house,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, hey, Caleb.
Oh, I guess we are live. You
Yeah.
never tell me this stuff.
Oh God.
I'm too busy. So anyway, so that's the deal with that. So that's cool. So we'll get that going. So it's good that you feel a little better than last week we did this, huh?
Yeah, that was bad.
That was exciting last week. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, well, you survived. You made it.
I did.
You made it. You
Yep.
did. You did. So
Hey, Kevin.
anyway,
Hello
hey,
from
what's up?
2022, referring to the little mistake I made this morning.
Kevin, if you only knew how long it took her to craft that stupid message, and
Well,
then
because you were dictating it to me like I'm some kind of like,
what do you call me? You know, but it took Kevin.
No, don't say it that way.
Well, because it made no sense what you were saying, and then finally, of course, you do it, and naturally, of course, you screw the whole thing up. So
well, because there's a
here's
lot
to
of
you.
pressure on me. So
because this is such a big deal. I know it's so
also
important.
I have Howard on my hoodie and
Mhm.
Howard on my mug and Howard on my picture.
Well, if people don't know any better, they may think you like this Howard fella.
Maybe.
This general, yeah, you're getting a lot of trouble with that. So, yeah, so we'll get going with this. This is our is this our first time in 2023 doing this? I don't know what's today's date?
Yeah, it is. This is our first live stream in 2023.
Oh,
hey, Ben.
Well,
good morning, Ben. Morning, Steve.
Happy 2023.
Yeah, happy New Year, everybody.
Or as you call it, happy 1987, Mary.
Mm-hmm. Ski just mentioned that in the comments.
Back when Bon Jovi and Tiffany ruled the planet. Back in 1987.
Yep.
Good time.
Good morning, Rob.
Rob Child of the 80s, always fun. Hey, Rob. Hey, what's going on? Yeah, so this
morning,
is
Jim.
first one of the year. We got some fun stuff cooking for this year. We didn't record this week because somebody was down and out for like the whole week, pretty much. I don't feel good.
I didn't want like
it's
terrible.
So we push everything off next week. But we get some fun stuff going though. I think it's neat to look at that blank canvas, right?
Yeah.
That is 2023. I don't know, whatever. Who the hell knows?
Well, we added another book too. So for our book club for 2023, we have which the first meeting is this Thursday night at 7:00 with Dr. Terry Alford for In the Houses of Their Dead. And then we also have The Real Horse Soldiers by Tim Smith in April, Main Roads to Gettysburg by Tom Huntington in July, and then Stonewall the West by Simmons in September, and Lisa's new poetry book in November, December. But then we also added a sixth book, The Lion and the Fox by Alexander Rose.
So that's pretty cool. That was kind of the longest term one we've had in a while. But he everybody doesn't know him. We're going to have him on an episode, and he is the guy, Alexander Rose. He wrote the book Lion and the Fox. He also wrote Washington Spies, which became that TV show Turn. And so he wrote a really, really cool book, which is basically about these two rival spies over in England. It was all about the Confederate Navy. So if you like Navy, this is going to be a good episode.
So this is kind of like we've been talking about doing an episode about the Navy forever. So this is going to be kind of our first Navy episode, but we do plan on doing some more Navy episodes as well. I mean, we've talked a little bit about them here and there with like Fort Fisher and all that, and as well as with the episodes we did on the Vicksburg campaign, but this will be kind of our introduction. And it's like, the other cool thing about it is this, when we have him on, it is going to be for our 100th episode, because we were like, what the hell are we going to do for our 100th episode? And then we realized the timing works out for when Alex Rose is going to be on.
No, and this is, we've done little brown water, little blue water. So this will be good. We've been wanting to do one of these for a while, and having him on. His book is not like a, like a historical novel type thing. It's a book. And people don't realize is the intrigue that was going on at the beginning of the war when it came to the Navy. I know a lot of people know this, but there was a thing called the Declaration of Paris, which was 1854, right around there, which basically said, if you're going to blockade something, you got to have enough boats to do the blockade, or it doesn't count, or it's optional, right? The United States had about 40 boats, so there's no way they could blockade 4,000 miles. So the British and the Confederates sort of felt that the blockade didn't really matter because going back to that declaration, right?
Yeah.
So the whole thing was, do you know how many boats the Confederacy had when the war started?
Like
one.
One, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
The SS Minnow. No, it wasn't the Minnow. It was a different one.
Yes,
So
that's
had one boat, and so the whole thing was about trying to get enough boats built in England. And there was a three-pronged attack.
yeah,
It was basically you had to have blockade runners, like we talked about at Fort Fisher. You had to be
yeah,
able to get supplies. It actually was not that hard to do. To get these fast boats. The second plan that they needed to do was use British boats and American Confederate boats to attack Union commercial boats.
yeah,
Okay, and the third thing was to build the ironclads to attack the Union Navy. That was
yeah,
the plan. And what the book talks about, it's the history of it, is how they were funneling money to England to build these boats in Liverpool.
yeah,
And so they were just picturing listening to the Beatles and making all this stuff. That's probably what they were doing. But that's what the whole kind of plan was. And it's really neat the way it does. And there's a guy named James Dunwoody Bullock. He's a Union guy who kind of becomes a Confederate spy. He ends up in stupid Canada and goes across to
everybody
England,
ends up in Canada.
right? And he ends up spending the rest of his life there. He's an American who kind of turns into a British citizen who, and it's neat because he took the British Kool-Aid. I mean, he was a tea and crumpets all the way.
Yeah.
His gravestone, by the way, to this date, of course, it's to this date, says American by birth, British by choice. That's what his gravestone is. Right. And so we're going to talk about that. And there's another guy named Thomas Dudley, who's a Union guy, who kind of is tasked to go over to England and find this guy and bring him back. And it's going to talk a lot about the Enfield, the weapons that were being snuck back and forth. And so if you're into that, into the espionage of the Navy and getting supplies back and forth, building the Confederate Navy, this will be your episode, because Alex Rose, his book is brilliant on it, and it really tells the history. So it'll be fun to have him on. And then we're going to have him on for book club too. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are going to be doing a book club with him too. Date to be determined, but it'll probably be February or March. Rob said he was gifted the book for Christmas. So that's pretty awesome. Good morning, Scott. Jen Tilly said there's Liverpool game today at 3.
Oh, that's for you, John. Liverpool. So as long as
he's cursing you right now because I don't think Liverpool is his team, right?
No, yeah, it is his team, isn't it?
Oh,
no, yeah, it is.
No.
I
don't know. I just know he was really upset that one day at Gettysburg because his team lost, and you kept.
It's funny how the more cans he had or glasses he emptied over at the Blue and Gray, the angrier he got. But I someone gave me a Man City scarf, so I kind of assumed they were Man City. That was kind of my team. I really don't care about it. I think throw a little ice down on the field, make the game faster, will make it a lot better. But that's my attitude. Speaking of that,
Jen Tilly is Liverpool.
Yeah, the Liverpool's cool. And John Henry, I think, used to own them, the Red Sox owner, but I don't know if he still does. I don't follow it admittedly, but I don't. Who the hell knows? But in any case, this will be fun to talk about this because there's not a lot of Navy stuff, and we've kind of delved into it a little bit here and there, but this is a good one because it deals with the spy aspect and the espionage in sneaking money across. There's a company over in England that kind of self-finances, and really, because when you look at it, the cotton trade was obviously cotton is king, white gold, all the stuff they called it, and that was 100% true. And how much of the British economy relied on Southern cotton. And the fact that the United States' job was to, whatever the hell happens, you have to keep England out. You have to.
Yeah.
They had the strongest Navy in the world at that point. England coming on would have absolutely tipped the scales. So how the U.S. kept British neutrality and how the Confederates did
neutrality.
Everything possible. Right. Well, that was their thing. British declared the neutrality from the beginning. That's just like Michael Scott. I declare neutrality, right?
Yeah, we declared neutrality too in Canada, but what was really funny is like you had the whole, I've talked about this before, the whole underground thing, the Confederate spy network happening in Montreal. Like Jeff Davis's brother, I think he was up here running things up here. The fuck?
What the hell?
Anyway, so he was up here. We all know that a lot of the Lincoln conspirators came up here too. Montreal was kind of just the place. And, historically that makes sense because even today, Quebec is the province that there's still a group of them that would like to secede. And I believe they now have official party status in Parliament again, because you have to have a certain number of seats. So they do have, I think they have official party status, but I don't know. One time they did. I'm not sure if that's still true. But yeah, and I don't know, there was some shady stuff going on in Canada, even though we said we were neutral. I don't think we were.
No, but
I think we kind of sided a little bit.
When you talk about these people obviously talk about the big battles. They talk about the big famous generals and all those people. Everybody has their favorite person, all that. But the role that Lincoln and Seward and Halleck and all those fun-loving guys in the White House had to do was keep the English out. And if you think about what a borderline miracle it is, when you got a country that powerful that relies on cotton that much, there were getting I could have the numbers wrong here because I wasn't really prepared to talk about this, but thousands upon thousands of bales of cotton they were getting from the South. It was down to 30, 40 a boat.
It did like have a play on economics for sure, as any war does, but I think like, the whole British Canadian thing. And I mean, at the time, we're still like considered like a British colony. We're a few years away from becoming a country at that point.
Well, you think about, Winfield Scott's blockade. You see that the Anaconda Plan, like the big picture, the big snake around this big, ferocious looking thing. You're talking about any boat you could find. And you're talking about.
Is that like any port in a storm?
Well, kind of. I mean, you sort of think in your head about this big blockade, like you had thousands of these boats all lined up and, all these dudes. There was huge gaps. So we talk about the boat runners, the blockade runners that were going from England to Bermuda to basically Norfolk.
Yeah, Mobile, also up in, I think, Newfoundland or Nova Scotia.
Right. But Wilmington was obviously the big one. But that first phase of getting the blockade runners through and getting supplies, and they're carrying Enfields. They're also trying to sneak cotton back. But the funny part about it, Mary, is the Confederacy also put on a self-embargo to England, where they were thinking to trying to blackmail the British into joining, saying, you know what we're going to do? The cotton we have here, we're not going to send to you. We're going to burn it. So if you want the cotton, and that didn't work. Apparently the royalty don't like being blackmailed. You could talk about Harry and his wife about that. And Meghan, they would agree with that.
God,
but
so bad
some things don't change. But so you had everything possible with incentives and disincentives to try to get the Confederacy, try to get England to join that Confederate cause. And they tried everything. And you talk about some of the efforts that the northern people meant to try to stop this Liverpool, this thing. And Liverpool at that time, it's probably no better now, was kind of like, what was that movie we watched that night? With Daniel Day-Lewis and
Gangs in New York.
Gangs in New York, right?
Yeah, I love that. And that is such a good, and I'm going to say it, Civil War movie.
It was. But when you look at Liverpool at that time, where they had this crazy number of crime, prostitution, all of this stuff, you had men out in the ocean trying to make money, so they left the wives and kids behind, and they had to fend for themselves. Poverty you have insane levels of deep poverty, prostitution. You had there was fights in the streets. Some of the most vicious thieves were women because most of the guys were gone.
Well, yeah, and that was kind of shown in Gangs in New York as well. A lot of the women were the thieves, like Cameron Diaz's character. I think that was who played it. She was like a pickpocket, and she would go into people's houses. I think it was called a turtle dove, and take stuff and all that. There's a few more people on here. Morning, Tony. Morning, Barbara.
Hey.
Jim mentions the Emancipation Proclamation was an essential tool to keep Europe out of the war, and that is true. Like, it was very political for doing that, and that's one of the things that, like, when Claiborne did his wrote up his emancipation, he said, we got to get rid of the slavery thing, or else Britain's never going to recognize us. And I don't know, I think Claiborne had a little bit more insight into British politics too, because he had served in the army. And I think that gave him insight as to what was going on in that country too.
No, and people's eyes tend to glaze over when you talk politics, especially nowadays. But and we do these things. We mostly talk about the war and the personalities, but the politics war is politics. It just is.
Oh yeah.
And when you look at what everything both Davis and Lincoln were trying to do,
it was all political.
Just picture someone juggling. When you've got the military side on one, the political side, and the economic side, you've got this diminishing returns for the Confederacy, where you're running out of men, material. Right, you're running as the Union was taking ports like Mobile, eventually Wilmington. That's going to cut off the physical supplies, and you've got the North with this diminishing, public support.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like watching two hourglasses running out, and which one was going to run out first was what the war really was.
Yeah.
And that was Davis's and Lee's big plan, was trying to get the Union to just quit out of supply,
But then that's ultimately what what slowed Lee down, and what ultimately stopped him was, there was the fall of Fort Fisher and Wilmington, which was huge. That was the final nail in the coffin, because it's like, there goes our supplies. But the supplies, now it took a little bit to get get the ball rolling on it. But once Sherman started his shit in Georgia with cutting the rail lines and all that, that's going to slow the supplies down too. And that's why, this goes back to why Chattanooga was such an important city in Lincoln's eyes, because of it being a railway hub. It's not just Atlanta. You have to have Chattanooga as well, because you realize, like, we got to cut off their supplies. And again, mentioned this a million times on here. This is why Sherman did not need to destroy the Augusta Iron Works. There was no point, because once you got the way that they can get that shit out of there, doesn't matter anymore. They can make all the the ammo they want. If they can't ship it, they can't do anything with it.
Such language. That's why we get those negative reviews for your potty mouth.
I know. Hey, Lisa. Lisa said, great comment on Claiborne. Jim said, I love the politics of the war. Yeah, the politics is very intriguing, because at the end of the war, it's the politicians, mainly Davis, he's doing his like kind of final tour where he's running away from everything. And he's like that dog with the mug and the fire. It's like, this is fine. He's giving speeches and shit's blowing up behind him, because he's not ready to say this is done and we are done. He's going around making speeches like, don't worry, this is good. We're good. We're going to pack up and move elsewhere.
He obviously had a personal stake in it. He was worried about his own mortality.
Oh, they are like Lee. They all were worried about, their own mortality at that point, but they didn't know that Lincoln had told Grant, I want to let him up easy.
Yeah.
Like that scene in the Lincoln movie is taken from something that Lincoln did say. Lincoln said, I would basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, I would just turn a blind eye if Jeff Davis and the rest of them hightailed it. And he said specifically to England.
Yeah. Attacking my heritage again, Mary.
Hey, I'm quarter British, mainly Irish, bit Scottish, some German.
Scottish. But what we talked about in the ports, we're trying to, I guess we're talking Navy real quick, but
this is like the typical ADD nature of our live stream.
The whole war on the Union perspective was kind of just block the Confederate ports, starve them out.
Yeah.
They could have, when Shelby Foote was on the Ken Burns thing, he talked about how the Union kind of fought the beginning of the war with one arm behind their back. Yeah. And he's kind of right. Mm-hmm. It was part of that McClellan, we need to win the war, but we can't lose the peace here by destroying the whole country.
They didn't have a reason to fight at that point. Or not, I shouldn't say a reason to fight. They did, to keep the Union together. But when Antietam happens and Lincoln makes that, and it is a political move with the Emancipation, that changes the game right there. All of a sudden, like, England is never going to side with the Confederacy when you've done that, because you basically said, this is what the war is now about. This is what we were fighting for. And as much as it was about freeing the slaves and that whole aspect of it, it's also very political.
My opinion, the biggest impact of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was just being able to have black soldiers.
Absolutely, that is as well.
Because you can, especially when the anniversary of the first last week, there was a lot of stuff on social media about the Emancipation Proclamation, and people, I don't want to say it's overrated, but you're freeing the slaves in a country the border states, and it didn't really matter, right? It was only the states in rebellion, which is like, okay, fine. But really having the ability to create the 54th Mass, the 55th Mass, those troops that we've talked about before, that everyone knows from Glory and all those books and movies, it gave them a shot in the arm. When we talked, either we talked on this or you and I would talk at one time, was some people such as, John Brown Gordon, who was a capital C Confederate. Yeah. He was advocating at Petersburg arming the slaves to fight for the Confederacy.
Yeah.
And just like your boy Claiborne did, right?
Yep.
And it fell upon deaf ears. Eventually it came around, but it was way too late for that.
Yeah.
But it was that shot in the arm of those troops that really put them over the top.
Yeah.
When the Union did have more men to bring in, the Confederacy was running out. And that would have probably helped them at least prolong it a little bit.
Yeah.
And when we go back to this Navy thing real quick, closing that port, specifically closing the port of Wilmington, it ultimately led to, Robert E. Lee having to go on the run once the South Side Railroad fell after Five Forks. Now it becomes a game. You get Farmville. You have leading up to Appomattox. Well, yeah, it's not just a video game; it's an actual place, and that's kind of how it is. And so, it was closing those ports. So when you look at that three-pronged Confederate strategy, the Navy we talked about, it was you had to keep those ports open. You had to get those blockade runners through. And when that stopped, that was it. That was endgame. So really, at the end of the day, despite the fact that we don't talk a lot of Navy here, which we should, that's our fault. The Navy's why this war was won. If you really think about it, it really was. It was stopping. It wasn't so much this powerful Union Navy. It was stopping the Confederate Navy. Yeah, that's really that's really it. That really is. Yeah, but yeah, I get like, and it's just it's interesting. One of the ports that they were going to was in Canada, which I do, and I get it. They weren't a country then, but I'm going to call them Canada because they were called Canada. It's so interesting, and then just the fact that 2 years later, here we are, we become a country. Canada, you happy about that? Canada, yeah. You guys beat my USA in the World Juniors the other day in hockey. I'm not happy about that. We're going to have a conversation about that. We're going to talk about that. I'm not going to like that too much. Pissed me off. Anyway, no, that's true though. But for the most part, it's fascinating, the politics of the whole thing, and just seeing how the wheels kept turning. And not only do you have those politics of trying to win the war, you've got those internal politics of trying to screw each other, like we saw with these House Speaker things, with the Halleck Grant thing, the Rosecrans Grant thing. The Hood versus everybody thing. Yeah, Hood. It was basically Hood versus everybody and Bragg versus everybody. And it's a lot of and when I read about it, I'm like, wow, this is like shit that happened when I was in high school. Like, this is like Mean Girls stuff. It's like you have shared. I didn't realize you were in high school during the Civil War. How old are you? Kevin, everything went wrong when Canada came along. MJ, good morning to all. CD said, I call it America's black hat. or hat, America's hat. Marcy said, definitely a political move to rid McClellan too. There's a quote from one of Lincoln's former secretaries that says it was purely political move. Politics and military are absolutely connected. It's interesting, just all the politics that went on. But yeah, and all just the kind of, as you said, I call it the Mean Girls politics from these generals and that's one thing, people ask me, I remember one former supervisor of mine, she said, what do you find so intriguing about the Civil War? And I said, well, besides the battles and the strategy, I find the relationships intriguing. It's not Howard? It's not Howard, no, but I told her, and I told another former colleague of mine, it's the, how they tried to screw each other over and how that ultimately sometimes would affect the outcome of a battle. Lives were probably lost because of some of these, just kind of these egos that are fighting against each other and trying to be in competition. Because we'll see, if you're on the same side, if you're doing the same thing, why be competitive? It serves no purpose. Well, and I get it. People had personal agendas. Grant had a personal agenda. They all did. No, how dare you? Not Grant. Well, they all did. But it became pretty clear, certainly after Vicksburg, that with the way the war, it became a question of when, not if, right? Yeah. And we talked about it. It was all positioning for how the end state was going to be. Yep. I mean, it's just no different than it is today. I mean, you think about. People think modern politics is so bad. It's so, and it is. It is. But I mean, people. I was reading a quote. I this morning I was up and I was reading, and some media person said that this fiasco with the House of Representatives is the worst thing that's ever happened in Congress. I'm like, have you not heard of Preston Brooks and Charles Sumner? Yeah, I think it wasn't it Charles Sumner's birthday yesterday? Yeah, good morning, David. Hey, but that's what I mean is that people, and this is where I wish people would just study the history more. Yeah. And because I get it all the time. You know how it is. In my normal non-Civil War life, I'll get those questions. I'll go to a work meeting and someone will say, hey, can I ask you a question? What's going on with these monuments? I'm like, oh God. Yeah. And it turns into this whole conversation. But if you just study the history And if everybody, and I've said this a million times, if you study the Civil War history, you'll know a lot more about today's politics,
yeah.
because it's just a continuation of it. And there's nothing new, but you understand it better. And people here get that, but people, the normals, as we call them, the muggles, who don't study this stuff, they think that this, they don't realize, a guy got beaten upside the head with a cane, a Massachusetts man, by the way. Speaking of that, do you see the caning the Bruins give the Penguins the Winter Classic, by the way?
Yeah, Rob Dalby said he's still kind of hurting over that one. That was a great game.
But I'm saying it's so. I mean, there was a big deal because so and so there was altercation in the whatever. I'm like, come on, child, please. I mean, and not only that, but Preston Brooks got replacement canes mailed to him. It was a lot worse. And you got to know your history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kevin said, like, he told someone to go look up Sumner Brooks, and they were like, who? And that's the and too, like, I always tell people back in Canada, like, they're like, why is the Civil War important to study? I'm like, well, because it absolutely has an effect today. And they're like, well, not on this country. And I said, the Civil War had a huge impact on this country. Not only are we harboring Union spies and turning a blind eye to a lot of stuff, but we had men go fight that we don't recognize that. Oh, and there was a woman that went to fight too. Sarah Emma Edmonds.
How do you not know her name? You're like the person you always talk about her.
I just blanked. Jeez, I just blanked.
When he lost brain cells last time at the old Second Wind Brewery, apparently.
No. God.
Sure, Jan.
Hey, Ski, see you later.
Oh, Ski, take care, man. We'll talk to you soon.
But, and I think it's like MJ says, it's important to educate people these days in their Civil War history. I agree. And I think it's important to educate, in Canada too about it, because our view on a lot of stuff up there is pretty skewed.
Oh yeah. It's so funny. I'll be at work and somebody will ask me questions. I go, you're asking the Civil War kook a question, huh? Funny how that works out. Funny how that works out. Go back to watching your, Bachelorette show and everything else. But that's did you see that new show coming out, that MILF Manor?
Oh God, how are we talking about that?
We gotta watch. Watch.
Oh God, so bad. I was just thinking, could you imagine a reality show with Civil War generals?
Yeah, it was called The Civil War.
No, I know that, but if you remember the old MTV show The Real World?
Oh God, yeah.
Could you imagine like Grant and Bragg and Hood and Sherman and Howard and all them living in a Rosecrans all living in a house together?
You could see Grant. I just hate him.
Yeah, he would be just don't like him.
No,
but he went to that reporter.
Oh, he did Cincinnati Enquirer, Cincinnati, but that's the real truth, though. Is it's this understanding the past. I mean, this is no earth-shattering revelation, and I wish more people did it. It's like, if you just studied the shit back in the day, all this stuff makes more sense now. It's just a continuation of a lot of things, and just realizing how the whole thing. And you realize we talked Lee a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, that was a good episode.
Do you realize just looking at today's politics, what a magnanimous thing he did by stopping an Appomattox the way he did? I mean, it's for all the people who you go to a place like Gettysburg, you hear it all. This guy's a traitor. This guy's a hero. But when you look down and realize what a complete dumpster fire, biohazard this country could have continued in. When you think of the fact that this country the Civil War ended in 1965, in 40, 50 years, there was trench warfare with mustard gas going on. Could you imagine this war continued?
Well, you look at the
chemical weapons and
the technology that happened
and airplanes.
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, air warfare began in
Imagine old Charles Tilden flying the airplane.
Oh God!
But that's what I was saying.
Somebody like the Red Baron.
It is such an underrated thing for someone to sit there and say, for one, it's all my fault, but two, no, we've did our Longstreet saying not yet. E.P. Alexander saying let's go to the hills, let's go to the mountains. Jubal Early doing this. For him to sit there and say nope, you got to know when to hold him, know when to fold him.
Yeah.
And I wish the people who ripped Lee would just look at that and just look at the effort he did there and after the war aimed at reconciliation. And people have a blind spot towards people like him. And I'm as union as they come, but I think you have to look at that, and you have to realize.
You have to give credit where credit is due with Lee. And David had a comment about the real world thing. Claiborne would put a beat down on old John Bell Hood.
Oh, can you imagine that?
Oh, I'd pay to see that.
Do you remember that old TV show with the wrestling?
Like a cage Titans match.
PlayStation figures.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, Robot Chicken.
Oh, Robot Chicken. It was like claim. It was who that? Maybe I dreamt some haze back in the day. But for real though, is you can have your rip on this guy, rip on that guy, but at some point you got to take a look back and say, okay, you know something? This could have been a lot worse. This could have turned into a Serbia. This could have turned into an Afghanistan, which continued. In this country, if we get to the early 1900s and this shit's still going on, you don't think Europe is going to take advantage of this? And how
absolutely, and just all the politics that are starting to rumble in Europe, in the early 20th century as well, and that starts playing into it, right? Like, I mean, or the Civil War, revolutions in Germany or Prussia, wherever it was.
Well, that I always say too is it wasn't until the Spanish-American War that this country finally came back together again. Because why? You had a mutual enemy now. Yeah. The soldiers from Georgia versus the soldiers from Massachusetts have a mutual enemy. So that had a lot to do with it too. But I think you have to realize, and this is when people want to rip on Lee, and I get all that. I get it. Mm-hmm. But you have to look at the whole state of work with these people. Yeah. And not everyone did that. For every Lee, there was a Jubal Early. For every John Mosby, but that's how it went. And I think you've got to be fair, and you have to be open-minded to look at both sides without that knee-jerk reaction. This guy sucks. This guy's great.
Yeah, or this guy was in the Confederacy, so therefore you can't study him, or paint them with a broad brush to say that they were all, whatever. And that's the important thing, is sometimes we zero in on one thing that these guys did.
But the thing about it though is you can't go the other way either.
No.
You cannot look at someone like that and then gloss over everything. You've got to look. We've said this a billion times now. Everyone's good, bad, ugly. If you're gonna rip a guy like Lee, you have to realize you have to praise him for what he did post-war. But at the same time, if you're going to praise Lee, you can't diminish everything that happened during the war. You have to
exactly.
And there's a certain bipolarization that comes when you study this, and that's not unusual. Yeah. But you have to be able to look on both sides and cross that party line, and realize there are good things, there are bad things. Yeah. And truth is,
and it's both on the Union and the Confederate. And by the way, MJ knew the show. It's Celebrity Deathmatch.
That's what it was.
Yeah, Celebrity Deathmatch. I don't know why I thought Robot Chicken.
Late night sitting with old Miller back before craft beer, sitting around drinking Miller Lite, watching that show. How funny that show was.
Marcy says, I think sometimes giving credit means glorification to some people. Credit means credit should be able to be given without complete glorification. And that's,
exactly.
Example of that is Lincoln. Give him credit and he gets complete glory, to the point where we gloss over the negative aspects of his presidency. But then some people like to zero in on one little thing, I'm going to say it, example of Howard. They zero in on Chancellorsville, and that's all they see. Or they base their opinion on what one author has said about Howard.
He would friggin' Howard. And look, I'm going to give you a shit for it, because I do, but you're absolutely right. But just you always seem to find a way to get him in. But it is true though, and years ago, and I'm no different. I remember, growing up in this area, I looked at this guy was a devil, this guy was an angel. And the one guy I look at is Lincoln a lot, right? Where he's up there with George Washington and the greatest presidents, all that stuff. But when you peel back the onion a little bit, you can see that sometimes there are some blemishes, right? But you also have to understand is that guy went through a lot of stuff that no president has ever had to go through. Exactly. Hopefully never has to go through again. But sometimes you don't want to be there when they make the sausage, Mary. And that's the reality, is there are certain things he did that you look back in today's 21st century, looking glass, that are mortifying, preventing people, putting people in jail so they couldn't vote, things like that. Yeah. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but there are warts on everybody.
Absolutely.
And I think people sometimes look at these these generals or look at these countries as sports teams where everything's it's not Red Sox Yankees, it's not Celtic Lakers. I mean, they're and you root for them, and when you do that, you look past the blemishes.
And you get offended when somebody else says something good about somebody else, and you think that somehow it's putting your person down. And it's like, that's not the case. No. Kevin mentions that he's as union as they come and had very strong opinions on Lee. He gives tours from time to time on the former land, tells the truth about him, but he does agree with us that credit where credit is due. And Lee definitely, like, he doesn't get enough credit for what it took to surrender at Appomattox, but then his efforts after the war. And that's why I say, like, maybe if he'd had another 5 years to live, maybe it would have made some kind of difference.
If there was someone who had every right to be bitter, it'd be him, right? And if you read that book, The Man Who Would Not Be Washington, you realize that's who he would have been. And he didn't get what he didn't. I don't think there was a lot of personal. The thing about Lee, I'll give him this. I always look at Lee as a modest and humble guy. I never looked at Lee at any point as a guy who I felt was in it for Lee. Like, he doesn't strike me as a guy who said, we're going to win this war, I'm going to be the man. I don't think he ever did that. And I think, and that's part of his personality. In the Martin Sheen character movie, Gettysburg actually captured him quite a bit.
Yeah.
Just because he had that aloofness about him. But he had that humbleness about him. How many people, think of those dudes who are out there who are married. How many husbands out there are ever going to say, it's all my fault? Have you ever heard that before? Think about that one for a second.
True.
But I'm just saying. But in that era, there was a lot of people who he could have taken off. He advised everybody in Virginia to stay in Virginia. Guys like Beauregard, right?
Yeah.
People like that who approached him, Jubal Early. All these folks, he always had that same phrase, Virginia needs her sons now more than ever, right? Because he's talking about the post-war. And when you're talking about things like the 14th Amendment, and you're talking about a lot of the stuff that we talk about with John Brown Gordon about, right?
Yeah.
There was that really rough phase of Reconstruction with those 5 military districts where they needed cool heads to prevail.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this country is going to break apart, and not the way the South wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he mentions in the one letter, I can't remember who he's writing to, but he said, you got to go home and you've got to work. You got to be farmers again. You have to focus on rebuilding the country because, we lost. And what matters now is rebuilding the country. Gentile mentions if Mosby went rogue in 65 and headed to the Shenandoah Mountains, it would have been a nightmare.
Well, that's the thing about guys like Mosby. No one knew who worked for Mosby. There was a lot. Obviously, there's a whole shit ton of people who, obviously, Lewis Powell was a Ranger.
Mm-hmm.
He was a guy who knew how to be in the shadows, and he was a guy who like those Revolutionary War guys here in Boston who just knew how to fight. We were at Bunker Hill last week. And
that is such a cool place.
But and so, how hard it must have been to take a step back and say, no, we're done.
Yeah,
in that era. When there was revenge, there was fight to the end. And don't forget, too, when Lee quit, he thought he was going to end up at the end of a rope when this was over. Because
they all did, and, you did look, the other, it's not the surrender, it's kind of more the ceremony of it. But, Chamberlain and John Brown Gordon and how they were just, I think someone told them not to cheer. Was it Chamberlain or Grant who said, don't cheer?
No, that was all Chamberlain.
Yeah, he said, don't cheer.
Chamberlain said he had to give the salute, the whole deal.
Yeah,
and that doesn't happen. When you look at other revolutions, which is kind of, the Civil War, they call it a Civil War, but it was more of a sectional war. It wasn't a Civil War traditionally is all in the same area, but it was a sectional war. But for that to end the way it did, to sit there and say the war is over, go home, salute your enemy, that was Lincoln. And that was Grant's, but it was mostly Lincoln.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that early part of the war with McClellan too.
Yeah.
Who always knew that when this war ends, we have to be one country again. So it cannot be a complete destruction. And it got him to a fault because he was a little bit before. If McClellan came later, he would be looked at a lot different than he does now.
Oh, so would Rosecrans, I think.
Right. Because his attitude was very post-Atlanta. He was trying to put a post-Atlanta spin on the war pre-Atlanta when the war was still in doubt. And that was the problem.
Yeah. And the other thing people say about McClellan too, is they were like, well, he wasn't for freeing the slaves. The thing with that is like, yes, that is very true. But you have to look at how some of these guys evolved in their thinking. Lincoln, for example, went from wanting to have colonies to wanting to have, once the freed African Americans, letting them vote. And again, a lot of that is political, but it shows an evolution in thinking. I don't know if it's really fair to say about McClellan that his views might have changed. Because they might have, right? Like any of these guys could have evolved in their thinking.
Well, he was pretty consistent all the way through, though.
I know he was, but I'm just saying, like, if he'd been like and I mean, yeah, I guess we would know that, right? Because McClellan lived for a while after the war. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and Marcy says 1862 versus 1864 war, so different. MJ said mentions like portraying somebody, because she portrays Pauline Cushman, that she talks about her friendship with Confederate officers, her alcoholism and addiction to pain meds. You have to be able to tell that kind of 360 story, right? That everything about them, that they had faults. They're not these like, but you can't put them on pedestals.
I always use the football analogy with the Civil War. If you look at the Civil War, the first couple of years of the war was that first quarter. First half, you try to get the lead. The second half, you get the lead. You try to run the clock down. You can't run the ball in the first quarter, just like you can't throw the ball in the fourth quarter with the lead. You have to know. In the strategy change throughout it. And McClellan was an anachronism in that regard, because if he had, put it this way, if he was put in charge of the army later in the war, like Meade did, he would have done a lot better, because he would have had a situation where his game plan, especially post Gettysburg, would have made a lot more sense. Now, he's not Meade. Meade's better than he is. There's no question.
Oh, Meade is. I rank Meade as far as generals go. I rank Meade as high as Grant. He's just a different general.
Look, I like Little Mac. I think he's underrated, but at the same time, the dude had some serious warts and some serious flaws.
He did himself no favors with the shit.
He did, but his overall plan, he was ahead of the curve, because he was looking at post-war, during the war. His issue is that he did it too soon. He really did.
He didn't. He was scared of fight. I don't want to say he was scared to fight, but like anybody, I think Bull Run, when he saw what happened there, when he heard about it, like it spooked him. It was like, I don't want to see my men killed like that. Like, and who would? He cared a lot about his men, and his men respect him. Look, Rufus Dawes loved McClellan. And who Rufus Dawes didn't like was Meade.
No, I know.
Meade rode by the men and wouldn't raise his head or anything like that.
That was always a fascinating story with Rufus Dawes, because we talked a lot about him, and everybody knows who Rufus Dawes is. And and he's a guy who, like a lot of them, loved McClellan.
Yeah.
And he just saw Meade as this aloof, weird type of guy who wasn't friendly with the soldiers. And when we talked to Kent Masterson Brown about that, I remember specifically asking, was that a Meade thing or was that a Dawes thing? Now, of course, he said it's a Dawes thing, because he's a big Meade guy. But that's the personalities of these people. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about a guy like a McClellan, what happens is, because of that big, long letter he wrote against Lincoln, and of course he's going to run for president and all that stuff. Yeah. Is when you look at the politics, think of any political campaign now, all those commercials that come out. This guy's the greatest guy, this guy's the worst guy. And it's no matter who the hell you vote for. But that's how it is. But all the negative commercials about McClellan are the ones we remember today. Yeah. Right. He gets really unfairly blamed for 191. He absolutely does. And to this day, when you talk to even people who study the Civil War, they have a misconception of that. And that's all because of Stephen Sears. We talk about
Sears does. Hey, Jacob. And we were talking about when we were going to Boston last weekend, we were talking, because we talk Civil War 99% of the time. We were talking about how we both really respect Stephen Sears, but because he's written about certain things a certain way, like Order 191 and his treatment of Howard, that's why we have these perceptions we do, is because I think what happens is other authors see that and they're like, oh, well, I gotta go by what his viewpoint is. And then it becomes his interpretation of the events turns into what is fact. And we know from our episode about 191 that he was going by one source and not looking at other stuff. And that's why there's this idea that McClellan sat on that for 16 hours when he didn't.
Well, people look at the Army of the Potomac, Gettysburg Army of the Potomac, and associate that's the way it must have been coming out of Maryland. The Army of the Potomac coming out of Second Manassas was a complete disaster. I mean, it just was. It just was. And I mean, it was the Yankees in October, just destined to fail, right? And what happened was you had McClellan, who the first time Lee is going to invade the North, he's going to take that army, pull it together, and push him back. Now, critics will say that it was kind of a 51-49 type win, but the reality is to stop that momentum. The first time Lee is going to continue to fight the offensive and go into Maryland, McClellan's going to beat him back. And what do they say? That McClellan should have chased him out.
Yeah.
With no supplies going back into Virginia heading into the wintertime. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what they hold on to. And his greatest moment was Maryland and as well as Antietam. So that's what he's attacked for the most. He's attacked for 191. He's attacked for being slow. You always want to take away someone's greatest strength, and that's what that was. Now he did, before we get all teary about old McClellan here, he did have a lot of stupid shit he did.
He didn't do himself any favors. Like Marcy mentions that she wrote a piece on the fact that Mac's reputation was a result of politics in the 1864 election. If he didn't say that stuff about Lincoln or run against him, he'd probably be fine today. And that's the thing. He does go after Lincoln. And for some reason, when you go after Lincoln, you become persona non grata. But the thing that, again, this goes back to putting historical figures on a pedestal. Why does McClellan get hit so hard over the shit he said? And yes, I agree, some of it was really bad. But Lincoln gets a pass on some of the stuff he said about others, like Rosecrans. And that's the thing. It's like, that's Lincoln's sense of humor, apparently. But I see it as Lincoln not understanding the situation.
Oh, it's politics. It's the agenda. I mean, like we said before, when you have these people running for office now, there's going to be all kinds of slander and spin put in.
Yep.
And you always want to take someone's greatest moments and find flaws in it to take them down. That's what happened with him. I mean, we've talked about this is why I guess we're talking about McClellan all of a sudden. I guess, his Peninsula campaign, he had a lot of issues, but you're taking away McDowell's army to go chase Stonewall in the Valley. Really hurt him. Now, he did turtle pretty quickly during the 7 days, even though Stonewall Jackson was apparently chasing butterflies somewhere the whole time, because it was not his greatest day. But
I just pictured that skeleton that's frolicking through the fields with the butterfly net.
No,
the GIF. I just pictured that as Stonewall Jackson.
Well, I hope that clears up. But he did get driven back. And then when we're talking a lot about, and this is where Mosby comes in too, was the intel Mosby had about knowing that McClellan and Burnside were basically, they weren't coming back, they were falling back, allowed the Confederacy to help push in, which led to some different battles heading into the later stuff, specifically Second Manassas. So all this stuff turns on a dime with this stuff.
Oh, big, yeah.
So you can look at good and bad for everybody with these people. But also, you got to understand too, we've said this a billion times too, is these are decisions made in real time with I'll be honest, anybody who's gone to Monterey Pass or South Mountain, do me a favor, shut off your GPS and go find the damn thing. And picture Army soldiers, that's how these guys got around is a miracle. But when all these things happen the way they did, it's a miracle things the way they happen. Chances are you got lucky when you won a battle because you were at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. And
you have to understand that these people are making these decisions without knowing what's going to come, without knowing what the future is. And we talked a lot about that with the Maryland campaign.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, exactly. And just McClellan again, like David's said, to Marcy, yep, he should have burned all those letters he wrote about Lincoln. And Jim said too, Ellen should have burned those letters. And that made me think like, God, I wish we had George Henry Thomas's letters, but his wife burned them all.
Clearing the history cache.
Yep, that's exactly what he was doing. Because I wonder what he said about Sherman and Grant, because he probably had strong opinions about the way those two treated him.
Thomas?
Thomas, yeah.
You know he hated them.
Oh,
And the
I
reason
would
why,
too if I was
and the-
treated that way.
and the reason why you know this is his treatment during the Battle of Nashville, when Grant himself was on his way to relieve him, as when Jefferson C. Davis to relieve him, because why he wasn't attacking Hood, but they didn't realize that it was a friggin' snowstorm in Nashville and he couldn't move forward anyway. So you know damn well Sherman never trusted him because he was a Virginian, despite the fact of Mill Springs, Chickamauga, all the battles that George Thomas won, Missionary Ridge. It didn't matter, and someone like him, he was always going to be a Southerner. So if I'm going to call Miss Cleo, or I'm going to pull up my Ouija board, I will tell you point blank that Thomas hated them. He hated them. Yeah. I know he did. He had to have.
Yeah, David said he absolutely roasted Grant and Sherman, and I would. And you know what? I don't blame him, because this is a guy that was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to fight for the Union. I'm a Union guy. I think some of his family that is still alive today still don't really talk much about him. Like, and his sisters turned his picture to the wall. Like, you don't just remove the picture, you turn it around, and then people come over and they're like, who's that? And they're like, that's our brother. He fought for the Union. And he, you know, he was also really close with Rosecrans. They were very good friends, and he had that going against him as well. But, and, you know, Lincoln is to blame too for that about Thomas, because when Thomas won Mill Springs, Harper's Weekly or whatever it was going to be like, we're going to put him on the front cover, you know? And Lincoln was like, no, you're not, because he's a Virginian. And that, like, again, had he been on the front cover, maybe more people would know about that was a huge Union victory. Well, and it doesn't get talked about.
You said it before, he burned his papers, but he also died young too. He died not long after the Civil War, so he didn't have a chance to tell his story. He didn't live until 1914 like Chamberlain did, or these other guys did, or Gordon did, and be able to write. He didn't have a Gordon had a really good political career after the Civil War. He was a senator from Georgia, became the spokesman for reconciliation. He was also lost cause because he had a specific, he wanted to maintain that Southern way.
There's a thing with the KKK.
Well, anytime you have that thing with the KKK, that's probably never. I guarantee that the KKK was not on his LinkedIn page. I promise you that. Okay, but I will say this though: he did go a long way in working that reconciliation. He became one of the more popular senators from the South. He actually became the face of the South for a lot of the ways too.
As long as he was turned the other way and you couldn't see his scar.
Well, there's a lot of that. A lot of these.
Well, the only time you can see his scar is when he is turned at that one picture in Gettysburg, and you can see it. It looks like it hurt.
Oh, he became the Red Knight at Antietam.
Oh, he cashed in his karma.
Oh, he was just getting shot left and right, and that was an old Winnie boy. Hancock showed up, the old 6th Corps, when he took over that division.
Well, the two really good ones in the Union Army at the time.
Well, that's a good story too about him, though. Hancock, he comes rolling down his horse, and he's pulling his gun on the Union soldiers who are rifling the Confederate dead, threatening to shoot him. For robbing the bodies, and they're like, "Who the hell is this freaking guy?"
Who is this guy?
But that was the beginning of Hancock in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, that's kind of and he and Gordon are very similar, and you've said that you said that Hancock is like the
I've said
Confederate version of
they're that Spider-Man meme pointing at each other. Hancock and Gordon. Hancock had the military background. Gordon did not. Things like that, but that they were similar in fighting. You know what's so funny about Gordon? After the war, he ends up getting into that insurance company.
They all got into insurance.
They did, but he had his own company. It was called like the Southern Life Insurance. It was something like something Southern. And he had a lot of people, guys like Wade Hampton working for him in the office, all these people. And he actually created a pretty good insurance company. He had to go bankrupt. It ended up falling apart once you get into politics. But a lot of the post-war study for these people. But I've always looked at Hancock and Gordon similar by the way they fought. They were very good, which is ironic that Gordon beat Hancock at Spotsylvania. People don't think about that. They always think about that, but they definitely had their moments against each other, no question.
David said about Thomas. This is something I never thought about. wouldn't that have been good Union propaganda though, to put him on the front cover of Harper's Weekly? Like say, look at this Virginian winning battles for us. Look at this. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's, it would have, I mean, I think it would have been, but would it also helped and, stoke the flames? Who the hell knows? I mean, I'll be honest, these guys were so desperate at getting Northern papers in the South anyway, they probably wouldn't even have seen the damn thing.
yeah, well, no, but that's,
you just want
again,
that. You just want that Thomas Centerfold.
the Thomas
That's what you
Centerfold.
want.
No, I
That's what
don't
you want.
actually do.
Now, there's probably a Rocket Chickamauga joke there somewhere, but we'll leave that.
Oh, God. The rock hard habs of Chickamauga.
Sure, Jam.
It's so bad.
Mhm.
But no, Thomas is definitely a guy that, yeah, I would love to read his post-war letters, but unfortunately, I mean, good for his wife for honoring that wish he had. That
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he died of like a stroke or a heart attack or something. But he wasn't very old at all. Gentili says, I've noticed a lot of them went into the insurance post-war. Jeff Davis did.
Well, that's in the South. That was a big industry because you need
Yep.
insurance. I mean, Jeff Davis, you just mentioned Davis, but Gordon actually was pretty strong. He also bought he also made, because when Gordon came out of the Civil War, he didn't have a pot to piss in. I mean, he lost everything too.
Mhm.
So he creates the insurance company. He ends up buying like a newspaper, which kind of fails. But then he gets into politics, and the insurance company eventually falls. There was the Atlanta office that he worked in, but then it kind of expanded some different offices.
I think he must have had one in Florida because he spent a lot of time in Florida as well, and that's where he passes away.
What happened was there was a lot of bankruptcy and a lot of shit that went down. Except he was always proud of the fact the Atlanta office stayed strong. But there was a lot of stuff going on that caused him to have to cash it in. But most of Gordon's post-war is the politics. It's him being a senator from Georgia.
Yeah.
And he's got that great grave down there in Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta. If you're ever in Atlanta, he's buried literally next to Alfred Iverson. You can still smell the whiskey, and there's a bunch of Confederates in the area too. And that's actually, and you know who else is buried there is Margaret Mitchell from Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
It's a cool place. It's a cool place to go.
I definitely want to get there.
The one sad part about that cemetery, if you've been to Oakland Cemetery, is the section where the Confederate dead are buried. It used to be the old slave section.
Yeah.
And they dug up all the slaves and chucked the bodies to bury the Confederates in. And there's a monument there that explains it, or one of those signs like Civil War Trails does.
Yeah.
Explains that. It's a sad part of the history.
Yeah, that is really sad.
But I think the statue of Gordon is still in Atlanta. I think I saw it when I was there in 2019. But
we'll find out when we're there in April.
It's tough to keep track nowadays, unfortunately or fortunately, how you look at it. But he did a lot in that state to help continue, because he really did try. His biggest goal is he wanted that military occupation over. You know who the military governor of Georgia was in the Civil War post?
That was Hancock, right?
It was George Meade. It was Meade.
Right.
So that was Atlanta. Georgia was the third military district out of the 5, and it was Meade. And he did everything possible. He wanted the Democrats, the Confederate South, the former Confederates, to run their own state, bring back home rule again. But they wouldn't swallow that 14th Amendment dog, and that was always the big issue for them, was accepting that. Of course, eventually it all worked itself out. But he was a strong proponent of everything, and he became the poster boy for the Southern life in Georgia, lost cause. But at the same time, he somehow was able to lean on the reconciliation thing too. Yeah. Which must have been a tough thing to do.
That he could have been a lot like Jubal Early, but you got to wonder if Gordon is doing that because he is so close to Lee, and it's Lee's influence.
Yeah.
Because didn't you say that, like, wasn't it in the which book was it where you were telling me that Gordon, like once Stonewall Jackson had passed or had died, that Gordon was one of the closest ones to Lee.
Yeah, that was what are the Gordon books? But yeah,
I think that was Freeman's.
It wasn't Freeman. It was the book Gordon, an American, a soldier, a Southerner. I forget who wrote it, but it was that book. But yeah, by the time they got to Petersburg, no, it was Freeman. You're right, it was Freeman, because Freeman's
right.
Write down, check this time, Mary. Play that number. You were right about that one. No, it was Freeman, because he said at that point, by the time they got to Petersburg, that Gordon had actually passed Jackson on the brometer of what he was.
Brometer.
it was true though. He did. And Fort Stedman notwithstanding, that was only his real blemish, was Fort Stedman. That wasn't even his fault.
No, that was that early?
No, it was him, but he had no chance.
Yeah.
I mean, this was one of those, we're going to sneak across, be very, very quiet.
Yeah.
We're going to sneak across at night. We're going to get behind the cannons and fire upon them. Of course, they didn't reconnoiter the area, so they got across. They had no idea where the hell to go. The sun came up and they all got slaughtered. And that was the end of Fort Stedman. But that was their last real shot after Five Forks fell on April 1st. That was really their last shot at it. And then the whole thing was over at that point.
Yeah, it was. And
not to be confused with Chet Stedman, by the way, from Rookie of the Year. Different Stedman.
I do. I love Rookie of the Year.
Okay, fine. Okay.
It's been a long time since I've seen it.
You're out of the doghouse then.
Wow. But yeah, speaking of Gordon, we are going to be doing an episode about him probably in February, since that is the month he was born. So we're going to be talking about him once we both have a chance to read his biography as well as his memoirs, which his memoirs are a little, you ask a lot of people and they'll be like, yeah, those are embellished, and which I do agree with. I've read some of them, and but his account on Appomattox, I think, is one of the ones that a lot of historians do say is pretty close to what happened.
No, it's true. It's definitely true with that, no question. That's fun. It's fun though. It's fun to deal with that. I got this image of this George Thomas now.
Well, the centerfold
laying like David Hasselhoff.
Do you mean the dude from Seinfeld though?
Well, you can go with him too. Same one.
That picture of what's his face from Seinfeld. Remember
I don't know if Thomas was in the pool or not, which I probably suspect he probably would have been.
Oh God. So bad.
There's your nightmare fuel, Mary.
Yeah. I don't know how we got into that. I guess talking about Harper's Weekly in the centerfold.
So stupid.
It's so bad. But anyway, we will be doing an episode about John Brown Gordon at some point in the next month or two. That'll probably be after we've done our episode with Alex Rose, which is going to be episode 100, which is exciting. Confederate Navy.
Yeah, that'll be cool to talk about that, because that's a lot of fun. And guys, James Dunwoody Bullock is a very fascinating character in history. A cheeky man, Mary, with a fantastic beard, by the way.
Oh, I've seen pictures of him before.
Yeah, and all the stuff he did to try to to help with that Confederate Navy and try to raise that money. And he got involved in these sketchy people in Liverpool. Yeah. And it's a fun part of history to talk about that is not really studied.
No, the Navy is not something, admittedly, I've studied a lot of. I don't know. It's not that I don't have an interest in it. It's just, it's like there's a few areas of the Civil War that just don't get talked about a lot. One of them is the Navy and the other is the Trans-Mississippi.
No, there's no question about that. The Navy thing is different because this one's not quite, David Farragut or, brown water versus blue water. This is the intrigue to keep England out by maintaining supplies and breaking the blockade and eventually turn the war on its ear by having this Confederate Navy to create something.
Yeah.
Having a self-financed Navy in England raise all this money to build all these boats was a ballsy call. And you've got this dude literally twisting the mustache in this shitty, sketchy Liverpool at the time, which is kind of like Goderich on a Friday night, your old hometown.
Yeah.
But it's and his book is really good because he really captures the mindset of what was going on at the time, who these people were, where there was cutthroats and it was like Pirates of the Caribbean type thing. The way it was, it really was though.
Oh yeah, well there's a lot of stuff like that going on.
And also in the Union knows Bullock is there, and they're going crazy to try to find this guy to get him. And you got to deal with the politics about, the United States wanted to seize every British ship to look for this guy or to stop, which would not have ended well. If you're an 1812 fan, you probably know how that would have turned out. But it just goes to show the throwing shit at the spaghetti at the
Yeah.
wall, trying to make
Mhm.
stuff stick for the Union to try to keep England out.
Yeah.
And Rhodes' book is really, really cool. So I love fall
Yeah,
from
but it's nice to
love that.
see a Civil War book. Honestly, I mean, I love the books about the battles, but it's nice to see a book that is not about Gettysburg.
But
You know?
when we meet with him though, and this is what we can go back and forth with him for a while with this, but when we meet with him, it's really going to be about that espionage and the spies of the
Mhm.
Navy. It's not really going to be a book discussion per se.
Mhm.
It'll be about the basis of the book because it's a
Mhm.
fascinating story.
Mhm.
It's one that we've wanted to do for a while, so we finally have an excuse now to do it. But
Yeah.
it's good though. And if you haven't read the book, The Lion and the Fox, it just came out. I think it was on the 5th of December. It came out. We got an advance copy to read heading into this, and I finished it. And it's really good. It's a really
I'm
good
looking
book.
forward to reading it. I put a hold on it at the local library here in Plymouth, so hopefully that'll come in soon. Bjorn, hey Bjorn from Abraham Lincoln
What's going
Bookshop
on?
said the Doug Freeman Brometer is the standard for the 20th century top 10 list.
Oh, it totally is. It totally is.
Brometer.
A brometer.
That's where he fell in love with the subject, right?
Oh God, Freeman. My God, he
Well,
did.
that, you know what, there's a few, like, we were talking about Stephen Sears, which again, I respect him. I love his book on Antietam. It's his book on Lincoln's lieutenants is really great. But as much as he hates Howard, he's got a man crush on John Reynolds. Like, Reynolds does no wrong.
Well, that's not unusual. I mean, we look at Gelso.
Yeah, but
likes...
it's like, but with Sears, the stuff with Howard, just, I was reading it and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a fair criticism. And then he totally, like, for Gettysburg, he totally makes it seem like Howard was an absolute bumbling shit show until Hancock came along. And it's like, okay, this is why we have this. This is, this is why people think this way. Because like I said, we saw the same thing with Order 191, right?
No, I mean, Lee's Lieutenants by Freeman's a really good book because it's going chapter to chapter, ripping on different generals who failed Lee. But it's interesting to read. Not a big Longstreet guy, by the way.
No, but Sears wrote a book called Lincoln's Lieutenants. Yeah, which is it's good, but again, he's not very. I don't know that he's ever kind to Howard. Actually,
no. Look, everyone who writes a book has their subject, who they like, and that there's nothing wrong with that. We talked to our friend Kent there. He loves himself some mead.
Oh yeah,
and he's kind of unfair to guys like Sickles.
Yeah,
he really rips on Reynolds. I think he's kind of lukewarm on Howard. I don't think he cares one way or the other. But I mean, if you read his book Meade, if you read Retreat from Gettysburg, especially the Meade book, he really talks about what the hell was John Buford doing? He feels like almost borderline insubordinate when he did Gettysburg that day. But that's also when you're reading these history books, I mean, people know it, but you're getting the slant, you're getting the agenda of the writer.
Yes, and they're
on these books. And if you only read the one book, that's going to put that idea in your head specifically about that guy. Now, you could read the same book by two different authors on two different subjects and think it's two different people. It's all the eye of the beholder.
You mean two different authors on the same person, not two different subjects?
No, fine. Okay, whatever.
Marcy said, "Better be in the good graces of Sears, or else." That's true. If Sears does not like you,
the problem with Sears, it's like, it's like you. It's kind of like you go to the doctor 10 times, and 9 times out of 10, the doctor tells you, "Sorry, you're so and so."
Yeah.
But you find that one doctor who says, "Take the herbal medicine, you'll be fine."
Mm-hmm.
Then you go with it. That's kind of what he is, and he bases his entire ripping on Order 191 on McClellan by a order that was a story that was on Kimball that was debunked almost immediately. And he takes that to paint this 16-hour sat on his ass narrative. But that's the problem. And so what happens is, because you're an influential writer, other writers will use him to build on that. And that's where this historical memory comes from.
Yep.
And again, we've talked before about McClellan. He has his own issues, and a lot of them are justifiable.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at that Lost Order 191, it's really unfair. And it's one of those things that if you go to Matt Borders, our friend Matt down there over in Monocacy, right?
Yeah.
Get him going about Order 191 and say, is it true McClellan sat in his ass, and sit back and watch him lose his shit? Right? Because when you study it, you realize that the stuff thrown against McClellan in that story is just completely unfair. It basically it's easy to see where the prejudice comes into.
Yeah. And it's the same with Howard at Chancellorsville. And yes, I do think that Howard should have been listening a little bit more to von Gilsa. But if you go to Chancellorsville and you go to where Jackson's men broke through, I don't care who you are. If you're John Reynolds, you're George Meade, or you're Hancock or whoever, you're getting routed from that position because, first of all, you're hanging in the air. And secondly, it's a bad position. He was doomed. But yeah, he should have listened to von Gilsa. But, the thing is then you have that happen, goes into Gettysburg. Treatment of Howard in Sears's Gettysburg book is not great either. But then after that, nobody talks about what Howard did. Yet here he is, goes to the Western Theater, commands an army. And I've had so many people say, oh, well, what did he do after Gettysburg? He must have left the army. It's like, no, he actually continued on to the very end of the war, led the Freedmen's Bureau, and founded Howard University and all that. So
He's
they don't
still
look
alive today.
Yeah.
Mary.
So they don't look at that kind of like the career afterwards, right? It kind of ends there. And I think that goes to how people just assume, here's Howard, bad day at Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. He must never have become a good general. And they don't look to what happened in October of 63 when he gets an order to go to Washington. He thinks he's going to be put in charge of Hancock's old corps. He goes to Washington and he finds out from Halleck. They meet at the Willard Hotel, and he's told, you and Slocum are going out west because of what happened at Chickamauga. They need reinforcements out there.
Yeah.
And that's when he finds out. And he just said completely, he's believing one thing going to Washington that day and comes away from it. And it's like, okay, load him up. We're going out west now. And it changes his career. Because I think he was worried about what was going to happen to him post Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of gets this redemption going out to the Western Theater, which I love to call, it's like the island of misfit toys.
No, it's just true. It absolutely true. But you can say that for almost anybody, though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a redemption story for almost everybody. There really is.
Yeah. Marcy said, I guess the whole point of a book, though, is to make a point that you believe in and try to get others to believe it. That's absolutely true. Better to have diverse opinions than just the same thing in every book. And this goes back to what you and I have always said. Marcy said, encourages us to dig a little deeper whenever we read something. That's how new ideas are born. Yeah. And that's why you always say, like, read, question what you read, and then, go out and learn something else about it. Like, I'm reading a book right now called Yankee Stepfather, which is about Howard in the Freedmen's Bureau, and the author fully admits in the preface that he's not very favorable to Howard at times.
Well, I mean, if you're going to write a book about somebody, you're going to be balanced, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That book I mentioned, referenced a little while ago, the Washington book on Lee, The Man Who Will Not Be Washington, is very fair. It's very balanced because it praises and rips him at the same time.
Yeah.
But again, any good book is going to leave you with if you're going to write a book, you give evidence to both sides.
Yeah.
And let the reader make up their own mind, right? And if you want to put an agenda out there, that it's your book. You do it the F you want.
Yeah.
But I mean, the best books I've always read are the ones you read it and you go, huh, and you decide, and it makes you think.
Yeah, that's how the Simmons or the Claiborne's biography by Simmons was like for me. It really made me think.
Right. It brings up that intellectual curiosity, that thirst for knowledge. To sit there and say, I just read this book on the Battle of Shiloh by this guy. I'm going to read more about it and just continue it now. And that's kind of what education and learning is all about, though. Mm-hmm. Learning is not about reading a book. It's a continuous process. It's a lifelong process. And whether you're right or wrong is the eye of the beholder, but you don't just hold on to that point like grim death and fight like
Yeah,
the
because
crusade.
it's okay to change your opinion. It's okay
Do you
to
know
say, well,
how many
like,
things
I was right about that.
how many things I've changed my opinion on in my life about
Same.
this sphere subject, where you're thinking this thing 100%, then you read more and you go, huh. And I was a big Chamberlain guy for the longest time.
Yeah.
I mean, New Englander, the whole deal. And then you read into him and you realize, okay, well, there's more to this. Nothing against Chamberlain, but there are other aspects in play on July 2nd, 1863 that helped win that battle. It wasn't just that. Sometimes the guy with the biggest microphone is not the only guy with the microphone, and you have to be able to sift through and read about the Colvilles and the Irelands, and not only that, and the Tildons, but not just on the Union side, the Confederate side. The great Cadmus Wilcox-Barron, my favorite Alabama, right? People like that, and it helps create that panorama, that 360-degree view of a subject, and at that point, you can make really an informed decision about yourself, and then you can fight as long as you want. But then you got to deal with the people who don't really know it, who only get that Reader's Digest top level comment, and then you decide how bad you want to fight the cause. But that's kind of how it is. You
have to, like, if you have an opinion that is not kind of, I don't want to say status quo, but I guess that's the right term, then you do need to be able to back it up. But at the same time, like, you shouldn't be insulted for your opinion. Jim Chamberlain liked Chamberlain. He did. He did like himself.
No, well, the thing, it's not so much about, the thing about it, those people rip on him for that. But I mean, the guy was a brilliant writer, right? He was very vivid. He was very descriptive. He was a, rhetoric guy, obviously a professor at Bowdoin, but he told a story like it was the knights in shining armor, which pissed off a lot of people. And it's nothing against Chamberlain, because that's, people say, well, he embellished, but you know what? That's how he saw it. Yeah. If that's how he saw it, then so be it. The worst thing you could do as a writer is to hold on to some cause and say, I'm right. This is the way it's supposed to be. Yeah. Because at that point, I don't want to say you're losing credibility, but you're giving away the ghost at the beginning. Yeah. Whereas my favorite authors are the ones who don't take a stand. They may lean towards a stand, but leaves you to make up your own mind. Because otherwise, you're not insulting your reader. You're allowing the reader to make up their mind based on the evidence you're reading. And the more books you read, the better you can get. But I got nothing to blame. I don't blame Chamberlain for what he did, because I literally, after reading a lot of what he did, I think that's how he actually saw it.
Yeah, well, you do. And I think that, Sherman's the same way. And Sherman does say in the preface to his second edition of his memoirs, he says, you know what, I took some shit over the first edition for apparently not getting events right. But guess what? If there was 100 people witnessing the same event, you're going to get 100 different viewpoints. This is mine. Yeah. And he kind of, that's how he got around all the stuff that, like, Beauregard called him out for stuff. I think I don't know, bragged. There's a few of them that were like, no, dude, that's not how it went.
No. Well, I mean, John C. Oates, the 15th, and Bulger too, for that matter, but he kind of stays in the background of Little Round Top, but mostly, it tells a story of where it became a line of demarcation. The story of Little Round Top is a fascinating one. There was a flag bearer whose last name was Melcher, and he stood there, and between his flag and the Confederate line, there was a lot of dead and injured 20th Maine guys. Yeah. And he suggested to Chamberlain, can I move my line up so they can be behind our line? Yeah. So they're not in no man's land. So they're at least protected. And Chamberlain, okay, fine, go ahead and do that. He starts to move forward. Okay, Ellis Spears sees the American flag going down the hill, and they all start running. Yeah. And that's the charge. Now, Chamberlain, they all agree, did order bayonets, but Ellis Spears didn't hear an order to charge. No. And he also denied that they were out of ammo. He said, we have plenty of ammo. He saw the flag go, and he decided to go too. Yep. And it led to that sweeping down the hill effect of Oates's Alabamans. Yeah. Where Company B was waiting and all that. Yeah. But that's according to Spears versus according to Chamberlain. Yeah. Melcher has the flag bearer. He has no dog in the fight here. He's just telling what he saw.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't mean so-and-so's wrong, Chamberlain's wrong, or Spear is wrong,
No.
or vice versa. It just means that's how it was interpreted at the time.
It's
So
how they viewed the version of events.
so if Chamberlain feels that he ordered the charge, okay, the bayonet charge, then he's going to say it. If Spears didn't hear it, again, there's also a lot of noise going on.
Yeah.
But the Melcher thing is the one that sticks out because that's the one story that makes the most sense. And if you're on the left, okay, if you're on that the left flank of the 20th Maine, and you see the flag going down the hill to go ahead of that line of injured, you're going to follow the flag and you're going to go. Men being men, they're going to take the inertia is going to roll down the hill, and here they come. You can almost see how it went.
Oh yeah,
if you think about it.
And I do agree that maybe Spear didn't hear the order.
But you know what though? I'm not saying I'm right or I'm wrong. All I'm saying is that that's an opinion, and if that's the opinion you want to have on it, then that's your opinion.
Yeah.
Chamberlain thinks one way, Spears thinks another, and no one's right, no one's wrong. It's how you interpret it. At the end of the day, they're going to sweep down the hill and they're going to push the Alabamans back.
Yeah.
That's not to be disputed, but how the whole thing went down. And that's what's great about history is you can interpret it. You can just see which one makes the most sense, read those gray areas and think what probably would have happened, and then think for yourself what probably did happen.
Yeah.
And that's why the 20th at Round Top is a fascinating story.
It is.
Because no one doubts the beginning, no one doubts the end. It's that how it got to that
It's in the middle. And it's like you can see that like Spears clearly believed what he did because of the animosity between him and Chamberlain, right? Like Sears is like that disgruntled temp, right?
Sears or Spears?
No, Sears, Spears.
No, I mean he's a Bowdoin graduate. He was, he knew him from before. He just didn't like passing of the armies.
No, because I think it downplayed what the men went through. It glorified war, and again, it goes back to what Howard said in his memoirs, where he leaves Little Round Top out of his memoirs. He talks about Culp's Hill, and obviously talks a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, but he also goes on this. It's a really great event. I encourage anybody to read it. He talks about how, when we're talking about the war after it's happened, we can't glorify it and make it seem like this is something amazing, that we did, because it wasn't. There's no glory in war. We can't embellish it for, young people, right? And the line that sticks out the most for me is when he said, they don't tell you, about blood-soaked hay and the cries of the wounded. And when I read that, it was around the time that we went to was it Spangler Farm?
Yep.
We went to where the 11th Corps Hospital, and our friend Mark gave us an amazing tour. I think we went with the Samias one time, and we've been with Gentili twice. And Mark gave us that tour.
I love the fact that he just is just Gentili.
We just call him Gentili.
Can't you just call him John? He has a name.
I don't know.
His parents gave him a name. They gave him the name John. Okay, so we'll call him John. but it is pretty funny.
But anyway, what it was like, and David said Howard's 100% right with that sentiment. Can't glorify it, but when he mentions the blood-soaked hay and the cries of the wounded, I remember asking Mark if we know Carl Schurz was at that farm, at that hospital, because he wrote an account of it. But I did ask Mark, is Howard here? And Mark said, he's like, to be honest, we don't know, because there's no evidence one way or the other. But I think that statement that Howard makes about the blood-soaked hay and the cries of the wounded in the field, that tells me he probably was there at some point. He would have went to visit the 11th Corps Hospital, but also not just that, but that's where Armstead is.
It would have made sense.
I think what he witnessed at Spangler, it like many aspects of the horrors of war, it stuck with him, because he made sure to mention it in his memoirs, like how terrible war is.
John says, I like Cher. I think he's going to be the artist formerly known as Vienna Lager. I think that's what we're going to call him. He's just going to be a symbol. A guy running. It's going to be a guy running from getting hit by a car. That's going to be his symbol.
Yeah. That he almost got hit by the car.
Good John.
But yeah, and that, like I said, Howard's memoirs are online. I'd encourage anybody to go read that, because it's a powerful 2 or 3 paragraphs that he talks about it. And I sometimes wonder, if he was like, kind of saying, we can't glorify this. But then he goes on later, the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, he makes a point, he's saying, this is way worse than Little Round Top. Like, he gets his dig in about Round Top.
Well, I mean, your boy has an agenda too, Mary. You understand?
Right? No, absolutely. Anybody writing a memoir has an agenda, and there are things like the one thing that Howard really vague books is that meeting with Reynolds the night before the battle. Is he doesn't?
Well,
really
I don't think they thought it was all that important. Truth be told, it might not have been.
No, but I do think there was stuff said there that had a play on the first day. Like we talked about before.
Howard's staying at the girls' school over there, and he comes over to Merritt's Tavern to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And Reynolds knew that he was going into town the next day, and he may have been simply said, "I'm going into town. Stay mm-hmm. back, and we'll go from there." Who the hell knows? But again, that is a good fly on the wall moment. That one, the meet with Sickles moments by the Trossel barn, would have been there's a lot of good moments specifically in that battle, as there with all these battles. But
there's a lot of fly on the wall moments. John says he's just Vienna, not Vienna Lager, just Vienna.
It'll just be V pretty soon.
V for Vienna.
What's up, V?
That'll be his memoir will be called V for Vienna.
John, you listening? You paying attention?
See you, Rob. He's got to run. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Rob. Sorry about those Penguins, man. You should be used to it by now. Boston, Pittsburgh. Sorry.
That was a great game.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time.
Yeah. But there's a lot of fly on the wall Civil War moments.
No, this is obviously a whole bunch of them. But again, it's how they're interpreted, how they're written about. And the usual, usually the truth is in between. Everyone has their binkies. Everybody has their favorites, and everyone goes towards those underdogs sometimes. And there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun people to study with this stuff.
I'd like to be at the breakfast after Spring Hill.
Pancakes in small mountains.
Yep. But could you imagine the tension at that breakfast with Hood?
No, well, that's the thing too, is being one of those meetings when Hood is talking with Jeff Davis about what he wants to do.
Oh yeah, that too.
Maybe a Halleck with Washington, in Washington with Lincoln, talking about how he wants to take over, replace Grant after Donaldson and Henry. There's a lot of them. The conversation with Jefferson Davis telling Beauregard to get in the corner after Corinth. There's a lot of good ones like that. And that's what's cool about it.
There's the other one too. And I lean more to the side of this did happen is Forrest, and that whether it was a letter or an actual meeting where he tears that strip hard off of Bragg, where he's like, ends it with, if you ever come near me again, it'll be at the peril of your life. Like that whole thing. And I know there's a side out there that says that did not happen, but you know what? That came somewhere from something that did happen between the two of them. So
it probably
I lean more on the side that yes, something like that. It might not have been word for word what we have. It was apparently Forrest's doctor, I think, that witnessed it or wrote it down, what was said. But that was the ultimate insult. Like, there's Forrest. He gets some of his men taken from him to given to Wheeler, and he just goes to Bragg and says, "I'm done, dude. Don't come near me again." Well, and he calls Bragg, "If you were any half of a man, I would slap you and make you regret it."
There's a lot of moments where people have said shit and you hope that no one hears it, but you really hope no one writes it, right? Yeah. There's a lot of them. Specifically, Campbell Brown, going back to Gettysburg now with Richard
Masterson
Ewell.
Brown. Oh, Campbell Brown.
No. His stepson there, where he gets the order from Lee saying, "Please go to the Cashtown, Gettysburg area," which is a 10-mile difference. And he finally loses his shit and says, "Does anyone in the general's staff know how to write an intelligible order?"
Yeah.
And someone wrote it down, and it kind of sticks with Ewell. And so there's a lot of those moments. So if Forrest said something like that, he probably did.
Yeah.
He may have denied it, but someone remembered it. But there's those heated moments like, you're at the DQ. Shut goes bad. You mouth off. Why would they put enough peppermint in this goddamn? and you hope no one hears you, but those frustration at work moments that happen all the time.
Yeah.
So I believe you probably said something like that. It might have been paraphrased a little bit.
Yeah.
Of course it did. These human beings in high pressure, high tense moments when decisions people are made are the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to be emotional. Why the hell wouldn't they?
Oh yeah. I mean, if I had, I'm not a huge fan of Nathan Bedford Forrest by any stretch, but I would have been pissed too if I had some of my cavalry guys taken away and given to Wheeler, given to anybody, that's just like that. I mean, that's Bragg taking it personally with Forrest because he thought Forrest was like not doing his job and all this other stuff. One thing I did want to mention is you got me that really good book. It's a small book about Claiborne and the last days of his life. And the one interesting thing that I learned, and I've just kind of skimmed through it. So first of all, he had a horse called Stonewall, which was the one that was the first one shot out from under him at Franklin.
That was a horse with no legs.
Like, God, that whole
thing. Do we joke about that?
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing too in it was that, so the account we have of Claiborne is that he probably wasn't on a horse when he was killed. And that's according to Govan. But there are other accounts that apparently they say he was on a horse when he was killed. And he made it pretty close to the wall, right?
No, of course they did,
And so we're going by the story we have of Claiborne's death is that he was not on a horse because he was last seen by Govan. He had 2 horses shot from under him. He was like, screw it, I'm just going to go in, raises his sword, he runs off. But there were some men that were with him that came back alive that said, no, he was on a horse when he was killed. And the story is that one of his men got injured, couldn't ride the horse anymore. So Claiborne got up on the horse. But again, we'll never know. There's so many different stories about how he was laid out. What is the name of that Claiborne book? David wants to know.
Stonewall the West?
No, not that one. The book you got me.
Oh, it was I forget the name.
We'll post a picture of it.
It's a book basically about the end of Claiborne. I forget the name. It has some weird obscure type title. We'll post a picture of it.
But you know what was really cool that we found out who wrote about Claiborne was Fremantle.
Arthur Fremantle, the great Arthur Fremantle of the Gettysburg movie. He's I'm merely an observer.
Yeah. Ben mentions he just finished The Siege of Lexington, Missouri, The Battle of Hemp Vale's good book. Was planning on taking a holiday trip there, but got sidetracked by sick kids.
There's a lot of that going on, unfortunately.
Yeah, but we'll post a picture of the book.
We will,
because it's really good. It's very short, but it's different accounts leading up. Like I think it starts kind of with what was happening at Spring Hill and all that.
Yeah,
but then it talks about
post a picture of the book for people like it because it's like literally right around here. What the hell it is, but it's find a picture of it and post that, and then we'll get that up so people could see it because it's I didn't read it because I just skimmed through and read some of it. It's pretty neat.
It's really interesting. Like there's accounts of when and where his body was found, and just that's kind of how they corroborated he was only shot once, and it.
Well, that's my belief. Has always been my belief. He was shot once in the abdomen.
And then they were talking about there was one account that mentioned he looked like he'd been looked after.
Yeah.
As well. Mm-hmm. But then it also mentions they'd taken his boots, his sword, his diary, and something else off of him. 2 of those things were returned, and that's why we don't have the diary.
They took a cell phone.
Yeah, they took a cell phone.
Well, why don't we get ready to shut this down, Mary? It's it's almost 12. So people have other things to do in their normal lives. So we got some plans ourselves this afternoon, Mary.
We do.
We have a new bar to discover this afternoon.
We do.
The Black Raspberry. We're going there today.
Sounds like a pirate bar.
Okay.
It does. It sounds like a pirate ship name.
You think so?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well, whatever. All right. So what's coming up for us? We got some stuff.
We do have a new episode coming out next week. So that will be the New Year's resolutions of Civil War generals. And then our episode after that will be about William Rosecrans. And then after that, it will be episode 100, which is going to be Alexander Rose. And we're going to be talking about, based on his book, The Lion and the Fox, talking about Confederate espionage in England and the Confederate Navy. And as well, there's what else are we doing? Oh yeah, book club meeting this Thursday, 7:00 Eastern time.
That's a big one.
Zoom. Yep, Dr. Terry Alford. So if you guys want to, if you're not signed up, we'll be sending the invites out for that this weekend. They're going to come from a different email address because something happened with our usual email address. So it's going to be coming from civilwarbreakfastclub@gmail.com.
Somebody must have gone on some bad websites because something happened with our email address.
Exactly what it was.
So expect it. But you want to be on this one. This is Terry Alford. He's world famous writer, specifically on the Lincoln assassination. His book, The House of Their Dead, is a fantastic read. He is a top shelf A-lister when it comes to writers on this field. So he's a good guy. So definitely jump on with that. There'll be a lot of people involved with that one. Again, it's not so much a book club. We're going to talk chapter and verse. This is really a talk with the author about the book. Yep. So if you have a chance to talk with Dr. Alford, it's a rare experience to do that because he doesn't do a lot of these. So
and even if you haven't read the book or you're not finished it, feel free to join us for that discussion. They're always learn something. Feel free to ask the author questions and all that. And then our next one after that will be with Alexander Rose in probably February or March, which we'll be announcing the date of that soon. And then in April, we have Dr. Tim Smith on to talk about Western Theater, Tim Smith to talk about the Real Horse Soldiers.
Yep. So we have a lot of fun stuff coming. All right. So off we go. So everybody have a good weekend. It looks like the sun is coming out here finally.
It is.
So we'll enjoy the day here. So everyone have a safe weekend. Hopefully everything looks good. So thanks for joining us as always. We appreciate the support. The fact that anybody wants to sit with us and listen to this stuff.
I know.
To this day, blows my mind.
Yeah.
And we look forward for those we haven't met personally. We'll definitely meet again soon. There's a lot of good read stuff. We'll hang out here.
Oh yeah.
So get some beers, have a good time, talk about the Civil War stuff. So, all right, Mary. So off we go. So everybody have a great weekend. Stay out of trouble, and we'll see you all. See you all soon. So look, please, if you think we have your email address, you email us again about the Dr. Alford thing because that's going to be a big deal. And we get a lot of last minute stuff, and sometimes the internet, it's tough to get this stuff. So if you want to be involved in this, please email us as soon as you can.
Yeah, Civil War and civilwarbreakfastclub@gmail.com.
So go with that one. And if you think we already have it, please email us again because we had some technology issue last week that we're still trying to figure out what the freight happened. So we'll definitely get involved with that. So all right, guys, have a great weekend. Mary, the pleasure as always was all yours. And we'll talk to you guys all soon. So have a happy New Year. Hopefully your New Year is continuing and have a great safe weekend. Mary, we'll talk.